the other attitude is that are we paranoid about the molesting of our children now, given the stats on who actually does the molesting?
Yes, we are, overly so. And, the people are frightened of, they're unrealistically frightened of what could happen to their children. The same applies with burglaries and a whole lot of other things. But this whole situation makes me wonder if something's happened in that theatre that has caused these people to rethink their situation, and they're worried that there's somebody going in there that might be a child molester or some dirtbag.
They'll be concerned about their own response. Once they're aware of the fact that there are children of that age in the cinema, then there's responsibility that comes to them as the cinema owner and operator.
Yes.
So they've been concerned about that.
It was always thus. I've got a statement from the Empire Cinema. I'll whiz through that in a second, but it was always thus. I mean, I don't know about you, but we went to the cinema, 2 or 3 or 4 young lads when I was younger than 12. We just wandered down the road and went to the flicks and came home again.
We were given threepence for a couple of lollies and ninepence for a pie on the way home.
Sarah, the Empire Cinema got back to us. For the safety of the business, our policy is not to allow persons under 14 left unattended. We've got a fully licensed restaurant and bar. It would be irresponsible to allow young children in that environment. We are not caregivers. We don't have first aid responders on site, nor do we sit in the theatres to monitor activity.
Yeah.
Which in the old days, again, was different. You had ushers, didn't you, in the theatres?
At every screening there were ushers with torches.
So if you rolled those Jaffas down the thing,
they'd be after
you. Were out.
That's it.
You were out. That's
so
right.
In the event of an emergency, Sarah, this is the Empire Continuum. We've got no way of contacting parents, guardians, which concerns me. This is the manager. Whilst parents do not have to watch the movie, they must remain in the building. But you think that's an unnecessary stance, Sarah?
For 12, Like all you guys have been discussing, this is what you all did, and Riley has been to that cinema as it's been changed with the full licence and been in there and it's been okay. It just seems within the last few months that they've changed the rules, and then it's not consistent with everybody that goes to the cinema under 14.
All right, so you want it clarified. You want to know if you can take your 12-year-old and the mate into the movies and leave them there.
Well, and then if I sit there and have a coffee, am I watched for 2 hours? Is someone watching me while I'm there?
That's
Make
right.
Sure.
Modern cinemas tend to have smaller rooms, and they'll have often 3 or 4 movies all playing in these different rooms at the same time, and they just have one person out the front collecting the money.
Yeah.
So they probably haven't got the ability to go and check what's going on in those theatres.
Well, if someone like Sarah is sitting out in the foyer having a coffee, Sarah won't be able to check what's going on in the theatres.
No, that's silly.
The other aspect.
If they wanted her there, they should have demanded that she went into the theatre with them.
Well, that's it. If if I knew I was going to Toodles, I'd buy a ticket and go on with them. It was probably a good film, but.
Teenage Mutant Ninja
I thought that was one of the.
Turtles.
I thought that was one of the implicit learnings, was that Sarah didn't want to go and see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Well, I would have made time if I knew I had to.
You're getting a lot of reaction, and I might come back to that reaction tomorrow.
Yeah, sure.
Interesting issue for you to raise, Sarah. Thank you very much for joining us.
No problem. Thank you.
By the way, the Empire says, while nothing untoward has happened on our premises, I don't want myself or my staff to be put into a situation where anyone's safety is called into question.
I tell you, Jim, it may be also that the tightening up of the health and safety laws that came in just a few months ago, which imposed much more potential liability on owner-operators as well, that may have had a bearing. On it.
It may well. I mean, people are on Sarah's side and people are on the other side. So what happens if there's an earthquake or fire? Who looks after the 12-year-olds? I suppose you can apply that to any time a 12-year-old is not being supervised.
Walking home from school.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, I mean, the example, what is the difference between allowing your group of 12-year-olds to walk through the mall in which the cinema is located? That seems to be perfectly okay, although I think the mall still, in theory, the management could have a view on that. But you allow a group of 12-year-olds there, but not necessarily in the theatre, which is in the mall.
That is a very interesting question. James Elliott, come back again. Thank you very much for
Thank you, Jim. Thank you,
your debut on the panel. And Graham Bell, always a great pleasure.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, everybody. That's the panel for another day. And Checkpoints with John Campbell is on the way.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us tonight. Moko, 3 years old. The couple who killed him gets 17 years with a minimum non-parole period of 9. But for manslaughter, why not murder? New Zealand is not a tax haven, but the existing foreign trust disclosure rules are inadequate. Why and what next? We asked the man who wrote the report. He joins us live. Brexit, what next there? And is there a single person in Britain who knows the answer to that question? And what does it mean for New Zealand's exporters to both Britain and Europe? Lydia Ko wins again and talks to our reporter afterwards. How will people get to the airport in Auckland? And Wanganui's famous Sargent Gallery is fighting for its life. All of that and more in a fairly packed 89 minutes. But first, here's Katrina Batten. Welcome back, Katrina, with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The judge who sentenced the killers of a 3-year-old boy to 17 years in prison says that, to the best of her knowledge, it's the highest penalty for the manslaughter of a child ever imposed in this country. Tanya Shayla and David William Hairewa were sentenced today for killing Moko Rangi Tohereri in Taupo last August after subjecting him to 3 months of abuse while he was in their care. In the High Court in Rotorua, Justice Kate said her starting point was life imprisonment, but allowed a discount for the couple's guilty pleas. She said their case is at the very upper end of manslaughter cases in terms of its seriousness.
Moko died at your hands in the most brutal of circumstances, and the end sentence imposed must reflect that. The sentence I impose must also denounce your conduct in the strongest possible terms and hopefully deter others entrusted with the care of children from similar offending.
Justice Cates. The Attorney-General has defended the Crown's decision to accept pleas of manslaughter by Shayla and Hairewa, saying a robust process was followed in not pursuing the original charge of murder. Chris Finlayson says to prove murder, the Crown would have had to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Moko's fatal injuries were inflicted with murderous intent. The Prime Minister says the government is likely to implement most of the recommendations in a review of the country's foreign trusts regime. John Shewan's inquiry has found the current rules are inadequate and are not robust enough to protect New Zealand's reputation. Mr Shewan calls for much more information to be disclosed when a foreign trust is set up and for annual reporting and increased enforcement. John Key says the recommendations look sensible and reasonable.
We will look to implement the recommendations after officials have examined the inquiry in detail and reported back to ministers. A formal response to the inquiry is expected next month. It's worth noting that foreign trust rules are just one part of a significant work program to strengthen New Zealand's tax laws and keep them in line with international best practice.
The Prime Minister John Key. Auckland's Transport Agency has ruled out a commuter rail link to the city's airport, saying a light rail or tram system is a likelier choice. The agency's board has today decided to focus on weighing up trams or possibly a high-tech bus link that might not be built for more than a decade. Its chair, Lester Levy, says while commuter rail could carry more people, it would have cost twice as much as light rail.
We have to look at value for money, and we have to be realistic about that. And when we look at heavy rail versus the other options, discounting heavy rail becomes a virtual no-brainer. We have to use the funds in the best possible way.
Lester Levy says more detail on the project may come from talks in progress between the Council and the Government on Auckland's transport priorities. The chief executive of 2 Degrees, who died in a plane crash, would not have been allowed to fly had he told authorities he had depression. Eric Hertz and his wife Catherine died when their twin-engine Beechcraft Baron entered a spin and plunged into the sea off the coast of Raglan in March 2013. In a report released today, the Civil Aviation Authority says its investigators still can't say for sure what caused the crash, but suspect a sudden loss of power in the left engine. Mr Hertz was suffering from depression and anxiety, and while the authority says this had no effect on the crash, he would have never been allowed to fly had it known. It recommends better oversight of privately operated, foreign-registered aircraft. A Nigerian police spokeswoman says no ransom was paid for the 7 people, including a New Zealander, who were freed from kidnappers last night. Jamal Khan and 3 Australians, a South African and 2 Nigerians, work for an Australian company, McMahon Holdings, which quarries gravel and sand for a big cement works. They were snatched 4 days ago in an ambush of a convoy in which a local driver was killed. The Cross River State Police Assistant Superintendent Irene Ugo describes their freeing as a rescue exercise involving security agencies and says no ransom was paid. To sport, and Lydia Ko says she's taken a lot out of her latest win on the LPGA Tour, her 18th professional title. The 19-year-old has won her 3rd tournament of the season in Arkansas by 3 shots. Coming down the par 5 18th, the world number 1 had a 4-shot buffer but hit her 2nd shot in the water while trying to lay up.
If I had a 1-shot lead or something like that, that definitely wouldn't have been the smartest option. But it's a learning point. Nothing's perfect, but it's something that I'll learn. Going into the next few years that I'll be back at playing this tournament.
Lydia Ko. The coach of the New Zealand women's hockey team says the pressure of Olympic selection could have weighed on some of his players at their final hit-out before Rio. The Black Sticks finished last at the 6-team Champions Trophy in London after losing 4-3 to Great Britain this morning. They also lost to the Netherlands, Australia and Argentina. It was the last chance for players to impress before Rio, and coach Mark Haggis says nerves could have affected some of them. He says some quality players were missing because of injury, and he's confident the depth is there to compete with the heavyweights at the Games. And Chile have upset favourites Argentina with a penalty shootout victory at the Copa America final to win back-to-back titles in the world's oldest continental football competition. That's the news.
Crisis.
There's no government in Westminster. The Prime Minister is hiding in his bunker, and the Labour Party is having a civil war.
Disarray.
There doesn't seem to be a clear plan, and both major parties in the UK, the government and the Labour Party, are in huge upheaval.
Uncertainty.
Now you've got Scotland talking about making changes as well if they can. So markets hate uncertainty, and we're the first market in the world to open.
Following the fallout. Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then after 9, news as it happens. In-depth conversations with world-leading experts and the latest trends you need to know about. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather now through to midnight tomorrow from Northland to Whanganui, also Coromandel Peninsula Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Showers clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon, patchy rain developing in Northland tomorrow night. Northwesterlies, gale in exposed places should be easing by now. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay remaining rain clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. From Manawatu to Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy periods, a few showers clearing in Wellington tomorrow afternoon. Nelson and Marlborough mainly fine, scattered showers tomorrow morning and afternoon, mainly about the ranges. Canterbury and North Otago, cloudy periods, a few showers about Banks Peninsula clearing tonight. For the remainder of Otago and Southland, areas of cloud, a few showers about the coast clearing tomorrow. Below Westland and Fiordland, a few showers north of Hokitika, spreading to the fjords tomorrow morning, mainly fine elsewhere. And the Chatham Islands, showers. It's 5:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Really busy checkpoint tonight. Moko Rangi Tohiriri was meant to be starting school this year. Instead, he died a horrible, painful death at the hands of the very people charged with looking after him. Today, Tanya Shaler and David William Hairewa were jailed for 17 years with a minimum non-parole period of 9 years after narrowly escaping a life sentence. Justice Cates said the sentence was the highest handed down for the manslaughter of a child. But she drew back from imposing the maximum sentence to recognise the pair's early guilty pleas, which saved child witnesses from having to relive the horrific abuse meted out to the 3-year-old. Later in Checkpoint, we'll talk to the Attorney-General, Chris Finlayson, about the decision to accept manslaughter pleas rather than pursuing murder verdicts through trial. But first, our court reporter Edward Gay was at the Rotorua High Court for the sentencing.
Moko's mother, Nicola Dalipaki, left her son and his sister in the care of Shayla and Haiwera because she had another child in Auckland's Starship Hospital. In a harrowing victim impact statement, she told the court of her life changing forever when she heard of Moko's death.
Why did they do this to my baby? Why did they simply just give my children back? Why did they not at any time tell me they were not coping? I would have easily exchanged the pain that Moko endured and have that inflicted inflicted on me, if that would have saved his life, I would take the beatings, the horrific abuse that they gave my son. I would take being kicked and bit. I would take all the torture if that would have saved Moko's life, but I can't.
Moko's injuries were so severe she didn't recognise him when he arrived at the morgue.
Tanya, you were meant to be my friend, someone that I could trust, and instead to torture and kill my child. When you are sentenced, I hope you think about your actions and accept that this is yours and David's fault.
She urged the court to impose the maximum sentence, despite the murder charge being downgraded to manslaughter for what she called financial agendas.
They do not deserve mercy. They offer no mercy. To my son who suffered at their hands, the agony my baby went through was awful.
She said she's now fighting to get her other children back after they were taken away by authorities. Moko's uncle, Anthony Paki, described Shayla and Haiwera as evil. He said the pair had never shown remorse and that they only feared for their own lives and deserved a harsh punishment.
I hope that every day you are in prison, that you feel the same when you open your eyes every morning. I hope that you feel the same helplessness, fear and pain that Moko had to endure at your hands.
He said he forced himself to look at Moko's injuries, but could only get as far as the young boy's eyes, an image that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Shayla's lawyer, Ron Mansfield, said his client had been through a violent relationship and was suffering from depression, anxiety, and there was also evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder. He pointed to a text message sent from his client to a friend about a month before Moko was killed.
Reads, "Morning sis, I was having ugly moments. These other two kids are doing my head in, and my effing depression is playing up hard out." And then she goes, "F my life."
Mr Mansfield said the arrangement to look after Moko and his sister was only meant to be for a week, but it lasted more than 6, and his client had 4 children of her own. Justice Cates catalogued the horrendous injuries inflicted on Moko that included a ruptured intestine, which caused blood poisoning, and a severe brain injury, both of which were fatal. She said child witnesses saw Shayla stomp on Moko, and by the next day the boy was soiling himself uncontrollably. Instead of taking him to hospital, the pair sat him on paper and plastic, and Haiwera rubbed faeces in his face.
By Sunday, Moko could barely walk. His face was swelling significantly to the point where he could barely open his eyes, and bruising to his face developed, consistent with his head injury. He kept falling to the ground. He was soiling himself frequently and vomiting.
She said when an ambulance was finally called, paramedics on the scene found him face down in the hallway with Shayla kneeling next to him. The judge said the case was characterised by cruelty, callousness, multiple acts of violence and a gross breach of trust. Justice Cates said she would have imposed the maximum life sentence, but had to take into account the pair's early guilty pleas. In Rotorua for Checkpoint, Edward Gay.
13 minutes past 5, this issue of manslaughter versus murder. We're going to discuss this with the Attorney-General later in the program, but hundreds of people braved cold, wet weather to protest for justice for Moko at courthouses around the country today, and in part they were talking about this. A crowd of 500 turned out in Rotorua. Our reporter Andrew McRae was there.
Justice for Moko! When do we want it? Now! Enough is enough! Enough is enough! Enough is enough! Enough is enough! Save our babies! Save our babies!
The crowd dwindled to about 200 as the hours passed before the sentencing process was finished. The sentence of 17 years in prison for the 2 who killed Moko received a lukewarm response.
I don't think it was sufficient, even though it's the highest one for manslaughter. I think everybody thinks it'll be appealed, so because it's sort of unprecedented that they should get such a high one. But it wouldn't have been a problem if they'd just stuck with the charge of murder, now would it?
Oh, 17 years, it's better than I think most people expected, to tell the truth, but still not enough. It's not enough. I mean, they've murdered a baby, you know, our future.
17 years is not enough. It should be life for a life, especially an innocent baby.
Can I ask you what you thought of the sentence?
I think there was too light a sentence. I reckon it should have been murder sentence, especially what poor Moko went through. was really sad for a young child like that to never get a chance to grow up in life.
They can falsely accuse someone with 21 years and these ones only get 17 years. No, that's wrong, really wrong.
The crowd was entertained by students from St George Seymour Tourism School as the hours ticked by. Earlier in icy rain, protesters gathered on the lakefront to march the 2 blocks to the courthouse. Lance Gedge came all the way from Auckland.
Well, I've come to hopefully give young Moko a voice and speak on behalf of children that have gone before, who've been abused and beaten and murdered, and just say enough is enough. And hope that our politicians listen and put some form of laws in place that stop this sort of thing from happening in the future.
Wrapped up for the weather and huddled under umbrellas in heavy rain, other hardy people knew exactly why they were there.
I think it's the justice system. They aren't taking an in-depth look at what's happening, around the country or around to the people. Go back to the people and ask them. The government seems to just brush it off.
Yeah, I'm here for these children that don't have a voice.
For baby Moko and all the others, hundreds of others that have, and it's just nothing's done about it, and now here they are plea bargaining.
Basically just to say my little bit about how probably the justice system in this country is not quite what it should be. It's the bit that's letting the loop in the chain that's letting everything down, basically, I think.
After the sentencing, Moko's uncle Anthony Paki thanked those who had stood up today for Moko.
We just want to thank everybody from the beginning, which this started 10 months ago. It's been quite an affair for the whole family. It's very, very sad. We just want to thank everybody each and every one of you that were here today, that have been doing the marches for us, for my nephew, for our family, Moko.
The crowd that was left milled around for a while before they dispersed, or hoping they wouldn't have to return to do it all again for another child dying at the hands of a caregiver. In Rotorua for Checkpoint, Andrew McRae.
And after 6, we will discuss that issue of why not murder, why manslaughter with the Attorney-General. It's 5:17 Inadequate and not fit for purpose. That's the conclusion of the inquiry into New Zealand's foreign trust disclosure rules released today, which has recommended a significant increase in information disclosed when a foreign trust sets up, annual reporting and increased enforcement. The government appointed John Shewan to review disclosure rules covering foreign trusts registered in New Zealand in a bid to stave off criticism in the wake of the Panama Papers that New Zealand is a tax haven. The Prime Minister John Campbell says the government is likely to implement the majority of Mr Shewan's recommendations.
Mr Shewan's inquiry noted that foreign trusts are legitimate vehicles and that New Zealand's tax treatment of foreign trusts is appropriate. However, it also recommends disclosure arrangements should be strengthened, including by requiring foreign trusts to register with Inland Revenue on establishment and allowing regulatory agencies to search the register, requiring foreign trusts to file an annual return, including their financial statements and details of distributions.
The inquiry chair, John Shewan, a former chair of PwC, joins us on the phone now. Welcome back to Checkpoint, John. Lovely to have you with us. Can I look at point 9.27? Applying the OECD framework, New Zealand is not a tax haven, full stop. But then at 9.29, you say the fact that New Zealand is not a tax haven is not a basis for leaving the foreign trust disclosure rules as they are. So what's happening in the muddy country between us not being a tax haven and needing to change the foreign disclosure rules?
Well, good evening, John. Well first, in that paragraph, in the ensuing paragraphs, you'll see I make the point that actually the label tax haven is entirely ambiguous, and it's, as I say in the report, now of historic relevance only, and it's best not used as a basis for decision making. That label grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s. The OECD criteria make it very clear, if we apply those, we are not a tax haven. But as I say in the report, that in itself is no basis for saying, well, everything's fine. So I just think the whole debate about tax haven was, frankly, a waste of time. And the real issue is what are the current rules? Are they adequate in order to ensure that we don't have illicit funds in these trusts and that people are not using them to evade their tax responsibilities? And that's not relevant to the tax haven question.
And in part, the answer to that question, as you've determined in this report, is no. And these are issues around disclosure rules, right?
Correct. I think, remember I was looking at two areas. Firstly, the anti-money laundering area, ensuring that we don't have illegal funds in these trusts. And secondly, the tax area. And in both areas, the rules, I think, can be best described as light-handed, particularly by those who are willing to take risks. And by that I mean, if you can be pretty confident that you're unlikely to be caught out by either the New Zealand authorities or the offshore authorities, then you may be willing to take risks that you can get away with it. And at the moment, I think some people are likely to be doing that. I've described the rules at the moment as being light-handed. They're not broken, but they definitely need beefing up quite significantly.
Forgive me for cutting in, but if they're light-handed and if people are, as you say, doing this, what are they doing? What money is here that ought not to be here? And what money is here that can be prevented from being here by tighter disclosure rules?
Well, the big challenge is that I didn't have access to the Panama Papers. They haven't been publicly released. So I don't actually have evidence of what the illicit money is. The approach that I've taken is having a look at the rules, having a look at some of Inland Revenue's files relating to trusts that have been reviewed, and it's I think a reasonable conclusion that the rules are sufficiently light-handed that if people have got illegal funds, this would not be a bad place to house them. But I think if they, and indeed some of the advertisements on the websites about coming to New Zealand make that point, that the rules are very little disclosure.
So if the rules are light-handed, if there is very little disclosure, and if, as you say, this would not be a bad place to house illegal funds, forgive me, but can you give us clarity around why that doesn't make New Zealand a tax haven? Why isn't it a tax haven in those circumstances?
Well, because the tax haven label is dealing with a completely different issue. A tax haven is dealing with the issue of whether tax is being evaded either in New Zealand, which in this case it's not New Zealand tax, or offshore. That's a quite separate issue as to whether the funds themselves are from a legitimate source. That's all about the anti-money laundering rules, and at least half the report is focused on that in that area.
So the money that wouldn't be here if disclosure rules were more rigorous, what's it doing here?
Well, these funds have to go somewhere, and New Zealand is regarded as a very good place by both legitimate fund holders and illegitimate fund holders, because we have a stable political environment, a good judiciary, a good professional support, and so on. So it's entirely logical that places like New Zealand are popular, and that should continue. And I'm certainly not recommending that we ban foreign trusts. But I think if you increase the disclosure rules, as we're proposing, then it's likely that those who are relying on non-disclosure are unlikely to want to stay here. I think we'll see a drop in the number of trusts that are registered here, and we'll probably see less coming in than is currently the case.
So 1010.1010, which is just a précis of what you've just said, the inquiry has concluded that a significant expansion of the disclosure rules and some changes to their enforcement can satisfactorily address the issues identified. What were the issues identified? What were the things that were most concerning to you?
Some of them I've already touched on. The most concerning one really is the flying below the radar screen, the fact that the rules are sufficiently light-handed, that it's a reasonable assumption that some people are housing illegitimate funds within these trusts, point one, and point two, a reasonable assumption that some people who are deriving income from such trusts are not returning it in their countries of tax residence.
Okay. So what needs to happen now?
Well, I'm hoping the government will accept these recommendations. There's about 20 of them. Some of them are quite punchy and they might not accept them all, but I would like to think they'll be accepted and legislated this year in both the tax and the anti-money laundering area.
And what is the punchiest one? What are the punchiest ones as you see them?
Oh, I think the significant increase in disclosure and the annual return, that's significant. I'm recommending that there be more sharing of information between the Financial Intelligence Unit of the Police, Inland Revenue, and the Department of Internal Affairs, who supervises the anti-money laundering rules for foreign trusts. That's quite a significant recommendation, which will no doubt require some careful thought. And then there's a series of other recommendations, but will have quite a significant practical effect, I believe.
OK, and the Prime Minister's already said that he's going to, that the majority of your recommendations are going to be accepted and that this will all happen. Just before we go, the politics of this, when you were first recommended, when your name was first put forward, there was a fairly robust session in the House. I interviewed you on that day and Andrew Little had a real go at you. He subsequently resigned from that. Did he apologise to you?
No, he didn't actually apologise, but I think I got as close as I could, frankly. I mean, he accused me of going to the Bahamas and giving them advice on how to preserve their tax haven status. That was completely wrong, which he's now conceded. But no, I respect the right of people to express opinions, but I just think it's unacceptable for politicians or anyone else to smear people's reputation by just banding around so-called facts when they haven't done their homework.
And so you think this report is fair, rigorous, robust, independent, and will satisfy everybody who had some skin in the game, whether it was genuine concerns about the nature of trusts and disclosures and what was going on, or political concerns about the appropriateness of you doing this inquiry?
Well, others will have to judge that. I've been as thorough as possible in the time allowed. I think there'll be a lot of people who won't like it on both sides of the fence. Some people will say this is going far too far. Others will say it's not going nearly far enough. I've tried to achieve a balance by preserving a legitimate industry, but dealing with what I think is a genuine problem.
John Shewan, who wrote this report and conducted the inquiry. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Checkpoint this evening. It's 26 minutes past 5 to Brexit now, which we devoted almost the whole program to on Friday as this historic decision was unfolding. Quite an extraordinary day. No one seems to have picked a Leave win for Britain's EU referendum. Not pundits, not pollsters, not even its champions, Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. But the surprise victory has sent Great Britain into turmoil and threatens to create a parliamentary vacuum. Brussels may be calling for resolution, but a weekend of upsets, resignations and head-scratching has left many asking, what happens now? Hesitancy reigns. In his weekly news column, Boris Johnson, who campaigned for Brexit and now finds himself one of its foster parents, wrote, "I cannot stress too much that Britain is part of Europe and always will be, except it's leaving the EU. Questions like when and how appear strangely to have been unexpected." Across the Channel, French President François Hollande was wondering aloud.
C'est vrai que
It's true that for the whole planet there is a question mark as to what will happen. I very much regretted the British vote, but I respect it, because that's democracy.
Je le respecte, parce que c'est la démocratie.
The German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier was less philosophical and rather more direct.
We are in agreement that this process should begin as soon as possible and not left in limbo, so that we can concentrate on the future of Europe and working on that.
The 6 founding members of the EU, Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands and West Germany, met in Berlin and presented a calm, united front, garnished with small hints of exasperation.
I hope that we don't play a cat-and-mouse game here.
That was Luxembourg's foreign minister. Back in Britain itself, the cat was being booed by the mice. As Boris Johnson left his London home, a crowd of Remain supporters in the heart of the city that voted Remain made their feelings plain. Johnson said nothing, his powers of persuasion perhaps being reserved for the Conservative Party colleagues he now wants to lead. Of course, the Tories must pick a new leader after David Cameron's resignation. Labour has a leader, but he's one an increasing number of MPs appear not to want. In short, his critics within the party say he didn't campaign hard enough against Brexit. Labour's shadow cabinet has started to bleed MPs, perhaps foremost amongst them Shadow Foreign Secretary Hilary Benn, who spoke to Channel 4 News.
At this critical time for our country following the EU referendum result, we need strong and effective leadership of the Labour Party. I told Jeremy Corbyn last night that I no longer had confidence in his leadership, and he dismissed me from the shadow cabinet. And I want to thank him for having given me the chance to serve our party. Thank you very much.
What does Britain do now? How does it address the Remain and Leave divisions? How does it respond to the Leave extremists, the man whose photo was tweeted and retweeted wearing a T-shirt saying, "Yes, we won, now send them back"? Them, Who are them? The Polish Brits, whose community centre in Hammersmith was vandalised with graffiti saying F off? London's new mayor, Sadiq Khan, responded unequivocally.
My message to Londoners who are European, whether you are Spanish, Italian, German, French, or whatever your country of origin, is you're welcome here.
You are welcome here, said Sadiq Khan. Britain is part of Europe, Boris Johnson said, but clearly, somehow, less so. Britain has voted to leave the EU. The Prime Minister has resigned. Other politicians are under siege. Europe is saying pack your bags as quickly as you can and out where the people termed them live. Who knows what the impact will be? And what about the impact on New Zealand exporters? Well, keep calm and carry on, at least for now. That is the message for exporters grappling with the implications of Britain's decision to leave the EU. Analysts and trade experts say New Zealand's trade arrangements remain intact, while a robust economy will shield the country in the near term, but they warn of the political fallout and the trouble it could spell. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
The agricultural trade envoy Mike Peterson is currently travelling around Europe discussing trade and farming. He says the Brexit decision has elicited a range of emotions from his hosts.
Shock, disbelief, disappointment, and even some anger. So I guess we're seeing the whole grieving process happening, certainly on the continent.
The Brexit vote has shaken money markets, with the British pound plunging and share markets falling sharply. But Mr Peterson says despite this, exporters should be reassured that nothing will change in the short term.
We don't want any panic coming into the New Zealand exporting sector. The current arrangements that we have into this part of the world will remain.
That's good news, particularly for the meat industry. But that will change as the UK and Europe eventually divorce, which is at least a couple of years away. Some argue New Zealand should cosy up to the United Kingdom trade-wise, quick smart. But former trade diplomat turned Lincoln University professor Crawford Faulkner warns that won't be easy, given New Zealand's priority has been to kickstart trade talks with Europe.
We have to do that in a way which avoids the impression in Brussels that, actually we're going to go running after the Brits rather than after Europe. Very delicate balancing act needs to take place. Didn't need to worry about balancing before.
Analysts believe the Brexit vote is unlikely to plunge the global economy into recession. But the uncertainty about what happens next could knock confidence and deter consumers and businesses from spending and investing. And that may force the hand of the world's central banks. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, doesn't think New Zealand's Reserve Bank will be one of them.
I don't think so in the short term, primarily because what he's looking at is the strength of the New Zealand economy. And if you look at his last monetary policy statement, he effectively had growth in New Zealand at a slightly stronger rate than the Treasury, so he's north of 3%.
The Director of Economics and Strategy at First NZ Capital, Chris Green, says Brexit strengthens the case for an August rate cut and says further reductions can't be ruled out.
We think the Reserve Bank here will cut rates certainly at least once. We're looking for around sort of a 60-70% chance of a 25 basis point cut at the August monetary policy statement, and there I think a better than even chance that we'll see another 25 basis point cut at the November monetary policy statement as well.
Meanwhile, the Reserve Bank says it's monitoring the financial markets and is ready to act if they become disorderly. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
27 minutes to 6 coming up on Checkpoint. What impact will the Brexit vote have on Australia as it goes to the polls? Is light rail the future for travellers wanting to get from Auckland City to Auckland Airport? And Waikato police investigate whether illegal street racing led to a fatal crash in Hamilton on Friday night that claimed 4 lives. Plus some amazing feedback coming in on Moko. Thank you. But before all of that, Katrina Batten with the 5:30 headlines, 5:33 headlines.
The judge who sentenced the killers of a 3-year-old boy to 17 years in prison says that to the best of her knowledge, it's the highest penalty for the manslaughter of a child ever imposed in New Zealand. Tanya Shayla and David William Hairewa were sentenced in Rotorua today for killing Moko Rangi Tohereri in Taupo last August after subjecting him to 3 months of abuse while he was in their care. The Attorney-General has defended the Crown's decision to accept pleas of manslaughter by Shayla and Hairewa, saying a robust process was followed in not pursuing the original charge of murder. The Prime Minister says the government is likely to implement most of the recommendations in a review of the country's foreign trusts regime. The inquiry has found the current rules are not robust enough to protect New Zealand's reputation, and much more information needs to be disclosed when a foreign trust is set up. John Campbell says the recommendations look sensible and reasonable. The New Zealander who was kidnapped in a deadly attack in Nigeria suffered non-life-threatening injuries. The Prime Minister won't give details of the injuries, but says he was not overly shocked when he heard what they were. The man and 3 Australians are among 7 who've been freed after gunmen attacked their vehicles last week. John Campbell says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been in touch with the New Zealander, but for privacy reasons he can't give too much detail. The British pound has fallen by more than 2% in early trading in Asia. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is to issue a statement before the start of trading in Britain in a bid to calm the markets. The New Zealand dollar has been stable against the euro and sterling, but has lost ground against the US dollar, and the New Zealand share market has fallen by more than 1% today. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thanks, Katrina. I don't think that statement from the Chancellor is very far away. I think it's just after 6 o'clock our time, so we will bring you details of it. Let's discuss the impact of this on currencies, markets and all of that kind of stuff with our business editor, Giles Beckford, who joins us now from Wellington. Welcome, Giles.
Good evening, John.
Hi, what's been the wash-up of Brexit today in the markets, particularly with the pound?
It's been, well, the pound itself has taken another kicking, I should say. Really, they're down 2% on the day, and it really from the opening gate this morning, and we're the first market to open in the world, the die was cast. You just knew that sterling was just going to keep falling. It didn't quite reach the lows that it did on Friday, but it's not too far off. Down 2% on the day. That means that across the board, a lot of other currencies have made gains. The New Zealand dollar in particular is up again. We are now at the best part of 52.7 British pence. Now that's the best level in nearly 3 years. Frankly, if you need to buy pounds, buy them now for that overseas trip, because likely we're going to see some ructions, but things will settle. More broadly speaking, share markets, which are always one of the first to be sold off in times of uncertainty and volatility, they fell this morning, and our own market was down more than 1% around lunchtime. Then it turned around, and I think the reason for that was essentially that Australia was more settled. Tokyo, which fell 7% on Friday, Tokyo has had a lift. It's gained about 2.5%. Hong Kong is a touch softer, but Shanghai, where of course it doesn't take much to unsettle them, that's also firmer. So at least in this part of the world, sentiment has calmed down. The key issue, of course, is how it's going to be in Europe. I think the European markets will probably be brittle, but probably steady. But the political uncertainty in Britain, where the 2 main parties are actually in meltdown, the Tories and Labour, you have to figure that probably the British share market has got another down leg in front of it, certainly in the short term at least.
Yeah. Well, this Osborne statement, this Chancellor Osborne statement, is going to be really important, isn't it? Really significant. What next, Giles?
Well, I mean, just on Osborne, he really needs to now chart a balanced course that will reassure markets and companies to the extent of saying, look, we are there to do whatever is necessary and there's no need to panic, in much the same way that Mark Carney, who's the head of the Bank of England, did on Friday night. But Osborne, of course, is a dead man walking. As the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was supporting the Stay In campaign, his chief protector, David Cameron, is going. So you've got to figure that Osborne is dead meat. He's got to portray responsibility and authority without actually sort of trying to drag or relitigate the whole issue and leave the way clear for the Tories. Our own market, I can tell you, has ended up on the positive side, up 19 points at 66.87. The New Zealand dollar, as I was saying, 52.7 British pence, 70.6 US cents. So we're down nearly half a cent there. 95.3 Aussie, nice and calm. One other item of business news just for you quickly. NZME, which is the New Zealand assets of APN. It listed the New Zealand shares today. They ended up at 80 cents each. And I have to say there wasn't too much enthusiasm amongst investors to buy them.
Giles Beckford, thank you very much. Our business editor live from Wellington. It's 21 minutes to 6. The New Zealander who was taken hostage in Nigeria last week has sustained injuries from the ordeal, but those injuries are not life-threatening. Jamal Khan was one of 7 mine workers taken during a violent attack which left their Nigerian driver dead. 5 of those people are being treated in a Nigerian hospital. The company those men work for, Perth-based McMahon Holdings, says it's working with authorities to get them back to Australia as soon as possible. Its chief executive held a media briefing about half an hour ago, and a reporter for the ABC in Perth, Charlotte Hamlin, was there. Charlotte, are you on the phone there?
I am, yes.
Oh, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're very grateful. What was said at that media briefing?
Mainly we got an update on the condition of the 7 men who were involved in this attack. Obviously, the Nigerian driver who was transporting the men around was killed by a gunman. 5 out of the 7 men have been injured, 2 of them seriously. McMahon company CEO Cy Van Dyke has said that 2 of the men have rib injuries and 3 of them have wounds. Work is now underway to stabilise them so they can come home. That's obviously the number one priority for the company at this stage. The speedy resolution of this incident, which occurred on Wednesday, suggests that a ransom may have been paid to secure the men's release. But McMahon at this stage is refusing to confirm or deny that. And the reason for that is that until it can get those workers out of Nigeria and home to their families, it's treading very lightly in terms of what information it gives away. But it does say the men are safe at a safe location in Nigeria. But it's not as simple as just getting them on a plane to get home, according to a spokesperson for the company. So until they are home, until they're back with their families, they don't want to comment too much further on the negotiation process.
Charlotte, just before you go, the New Zealander, Jamal Khan, he sounds on the face of it to be an expat New Zealander, very much an Australian. Is that your understanding of his status, or has that not been elaborated upon?
We understand that is the case, that he's an Australian resident who's been here for some time. The information that has been provided about these men, though, has been a little sketchy.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's because the company and Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been really eager to keep their cards close to their chest just to make sure that these men, A, were released and B, can get home to their families. We did get a statement from another of the men, a Tasmanian man called Mark Gabbarty. His family issued a statement thanking the company and authorities both locally here in Australia and also in Nigeria for showing what they described as remarkable compassion and fierce determination to get these men home. We understand McMahon staff have worked tirelessly to do that. Some even slept overnight in crisis response rooms here at their Perth headquarters. So certainly a lot of relief from all involved at this really positive result.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. We really appreciate it. Charlotte Hamlin from the ABC in Perth, who's just been to that media briefing. Nigerian media reporting a ransom was paid, which would certainly explain why this has been resolved so quickly. It's 17 and a half minutes to 6. New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko has won her 3rd LPGA Tour title. The latest event in Arkansas. The 19-year-old was in the share of the lead with an American at the start of the day before she made 5 birdies on the front 9 to all but seal victory. Remarkable. Coming down the final hole of the tournament, the par 5 18th, Ko had a 4-shot lead playing safe. She decided to lay out with her second, but it found the water. Ko recovered and ended up going to win by 3 shots. She told our sports reporter, Matt Chatterton, that she may not play safe next time.
I hit the ball really well at the front 9. And as I went to the back 9, I was pulling a few of my shots, and I think that just kind of carried on into that second shot. I was planning on laying up right of that hazard. I knew that if I did pull it, I would go in the water, but I trusted my iron. I ended up pulling it and it went in the water. But unfortunately, at that stage, I had 4 shots lead. But if I had a 1-shot lead or something like that, that definitely wouldn't have been the smartest option. But it's I think it's a learning point. Nothing's perfect, but it's something that I'll learn. Going into the next few years that I'll be back at playing this tournament.
Going into this event, or winning this event even, must be quite reassuring after what happened at the Women's PGA Championship?
I played really solid at Sahali. So even though I did end up coming second, I just knew that I had a lot of positives to take from that week. And no, I played well last week in Michigan, so going into this week gave me confidence. And this last 3 stretch of events, I played solid. So I'm happy with the way it has ended up. And it's definitely going to give me confidence going into Quarterval. But I'm going to enjoy the week off next week, and be excited to get back into it in a few weeks. No, in 2 weeks.
Yeah, the US Open is, I'm guessing, that tournament you're talking about there. Are you confident going into that after this week's performance that you're going to be right up there again come Sunday?
Every week is a new week, and you never know what's going to happen. Even from day to day, it can be different. But I think that definitely gives me confidence. Going into the US Open. But it's exciting times, and there's so much to enjoy about the US Open. And I love going and playing in California on the West Coast. I think it's going to be fun. I've got to take some good rest next week and also prepare well for it.
Just finally, in only about 2 months now, we've got the Olympics. A lot of the men have been pulling out, but you're still committed to going and representing New Zealand?
Yeah, I'm super excited about the Olympics. I think it's a great way to grow the game, and I think it's going to open up more opportunities for golf. And as a fan of sports myself, I think I've looked at turned on the TV and learned about other athletes and other sports. So this is a way on I think people learning more about golf, and I think this is going to be just an exciting time, and for the golf to return, for the men's side and for the women's to be there the first time, it's going to be very exciting. The world's best experts are handling the situation, with the Zika. Obviously it's unfortunate that is going on, but you just got to be confident and supportive of the people that are there handling it, and the world's best people are there, so we just gotta trust them.
Is it, from your perspective at all, I guess, upsetting that some of the likes of Rory are pulling out, or do you understand where they're coming from?
I mean, I think you can both look at both ways, but you can't. I think I can't really speak for them. They obviously had good reason on why they wanted to pull out, and you have to understand that, and every player is different. Obviously, it would have been great if they did end up playing, but you have to, I think, understand and support their decisions.
Lydia Ko, remarkable, talking to Matt Chatterton. 12 and a half minutes to 6. Australians head to the poll this weekend. That's come about very fast to decide who'll govern for the next 3 years, and the Brexit result has some political parties nervous of protest votes. And when they come out of the blue, the Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull officially launched his re-election bid with the coalition in Sydney yesterday, saying the country needs calm, steady hands to offset any repercussions from Brexit. While in Brisbane, the Labour leader Bill Shorten said if coalition was elected, it would destroy the health system and hurt middle and working class families. Our reporter Demelza Leslie is in Sydney covering the campaign and joins us now via Skype. Hi, Demelza. The polls...
Hi, John.
The polls are just consistently getting it wrong everywhere, right? They were wrong about Trump. They were wrong about Brexit. What are they saying in Australia?
Well, actually, the polls have moved slightly over here in Australia in the past week. It had the coalition, which is, the current governing government, on 51%. They've just pulled slightly ahead of a Labour government on 49%. But up until last week, they were neck and neck this entire, what has been a 7-week campaign already. And obviously, this is 5 days out from their federal election. So, I'd imagine that the Liberals would be pretty happy there's been a little bit of movement. And I'm not sure if you can blame that on Brexit or not, but they are getting slightly nervous here about the fact that, there are people that come out and do a protest vote and, they're nervous that this might happen here.
Yeah. Fascinating. I've just seen a brief headline about Malcolm Turnbull saying that, should he retain power, he, Australia and New Zealand will make a joint approach post-Brexit to work out terms of trade with Britain and Europe. Is that right?
Yes, Malcolm Turnbull has said that today, and our Prime Minister John Key has confirmed that. They spoke on the phone this morning and talked about where they could find some common grounds, common causes to work together. This is mainly around the likes of New Zealanders and Australia travelling to the UK and to Europe to make sure that we still have access. John Key's drawing the line on any common grounds or any, sorry about that, very noisy bus in the background there, any linking together and working on trade agreements, because I think as far as he's concerned, New Zealand wants to deal with its own free trade agreement with either the UK and also Europe.
Demelza, I have a sense that Australians are slightly over their own politics. Is there real engagement with this election? Do people give a damn? Is there much coverage? Are people talking about it? Is the turnout expected to be high?
The turnout at this stage is not expected to be high. The poll that I talked about earlier, it actually had a third of voters undecided about who they'll support. And at the last election, it was that high in terms of people not turning out to the polls. So there is the worry that people will do that, or they will give a protest vote to an independent, which Malcolm Turnbull has been quick to warn that if you do that, you could destabilise and create a really unstable or a government that's in chaos, basically, if there's not an outright majority for a governing party. So, there's a little bit of fear tactics being used by both leaders. So we've got, Malcolm Turnbull on one hand saying that, it could create chaos and you need steady hands to steer the ship at this stage, stick with what you know. But you've got Labor's Bill Shorten on the other hand saying, look, they changed their leader 10 months ago. Who's to say that, the coalition will get in and we'll see Malcolm Turnbull stick around. But, the word that people that I've been speaking to, those at the coalition launch yesterday, they're fairly confident, though, that Malcolm Turnbull, if he does get in, will stick around for a 3-year term. But hey, over the past 9 years, there hasn't been a really good record for Prime Ministers here. So I suppose you've got to believe it when you see it.
Demelza Leslie, live from the campaign trail in Sydney. Thanks, Demelza. Lovely to talk to you. Demelza, of course, is based in Wellington, being a political reporter. Had she been based in Auckland, she would have had to have gone to our airport, Auckland's airport, to fly to Sydney. Sometimes the road trip to Auckland Airport can take almost as long as the flight itself. So how is that going to be solved? Because it really is hard work getting to and from the airport sometimes. Well, the city's transport agency says it definitely won't be in a commuter train and probably will be on light rail or trams, as they used to be called. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Niles says, though, don't hold your breath.
Given the choice, these passengers who've just caught the airport bus into downtown Auckland would rather have taken something else.
I'd definitely take a train because it avoids the traffic.
It's a little bit bumpy on the bus.
Other cities like Sydney, I've been on their train directly from the airport to the city and back again. It was amazing, it was easy, and I think that having one of those here in Auckland would be a great idea.
But it won't be one of Auckland's fancy new electric trains. Auckland Transport has ruled out extending the city's commuter rail network. Instead, it says a light rail or tram link is the most likely option, doing a similar job for half the price. The chair, Lester Levy, says while commuter trains could carry more people, the agency can't see any real benefit in spending twice the estimated $1.3 billion cost of a tram link.
We have to look at value for money, and we have to be realistic about that. And when we look at heavy rail versus the other options, discounting heavy rail becomes a virtual no-brainer. We have to use the funds in the best possible way.
Whatever it is, when would it happen?
This could be quite a while away. Everything's very fluid.
A decade or?
I'm sure it would be more than that.
Still in the mix is some form of high-tech or driverless bus technology, but Dr Levy says there's no obvious system likely to prove viable in the foreseeable future. Trams would come as part of a light rail system across the central part of Auckland, and whatever technology is used, a route is already being secured. Auckland Transport's Chief Strategy Officer Pete Clark says a new motorway underpass being built near Mangere is just part of a system that could be used by normal buses in the medium term.
Once that trench is completed, that space that could be used for light rail could be used to run bus options down through Kirkbride on State Highway 20A using the shoulder lanes through to the city centre, either up Dominion Road or along Waterview when that's completed into the city centre. But that would be a sort of a progression step, if you like, before light rail or some other emerging technology sort of does the heavy lifting later on.
The likely tram route would continue off the end of a proposed line down Dominion Road. Decisions on the new airport transport link are tied up in ongoing talks between the council and the government to agree the city's priorities, and more could be known later this year. But today commuter trains have been ruled out, and just what finally replaces buses on the route is a decade or more away. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Todd Niall.
5.5 minutes to 6. The Waikato police are looking at illegal street racing as part of their investigation into what really was a horror smash on Friday night that killed 4 young people. But car enthusiasts say the accident is not typical of the behaviour of boy racers in the region. Joe O'Brien reports.
4 people in their late teens and 20s died when the Nissan Skyline they were travelling in collided with a van near Hamilton Airport. Police are appealing for information about a white hatchback or similar car that may have been travelling with them. The region's road policing manager, Inspector Freda Grace, says some of those involved in the crash may have had connections with the local street racing scene.
They were tenuously linked to that group, perhaps. It's clear that they are interested in cars and potentially that kind of activity. But let's not take away from what's occurred. It's a tragedy what's occurred, and there will be a lot of people grieving over that, and I don't think that apportioning blame is helpful.
Brooke Ings-Clark runs a Facebook page for Hamilton car enthusiasts and says she knew of 2 of those killed in Friday's crash. But the 20-year-old says she was surprised to hear about the accident, as she hasn't heard of racing happening for a while. She says most of those involved in the local car scene just meet to talk about their vehicles, but there are some people who take it further.
Most of us do just meet to look at each other's cars and stuff like that, and a lot of it isn't actually action, it's just to talk about what's going on with your cars, but some people have sort of taken it to the further extent where they have gone and raced or, loss of traction is what the cops call it.
Brooke Ings-Clark says car enthusiasts gather around Hamilton every Friday night and sometimes on Thursdays and Saturdays. She says she's very disappointed to hear police identify alcohol as a likely factor in the crash.
The fact that someone was intoxicated, that really annoys me because, we make sure that people do not drink and drive, and the fact that, alcohol was involved in this, it actually really puts us off because it gives us quite a bad name.
Mia Tarawhiti, who also helps out with the Car Enthusiasts Facebook page, says he didn't know those involved in the crash and hadn't seen their car in Hamilton. But he says car enthusiasts come to Waikato from all over the North Island. He says he doesn't believe, however, the accident was due to what's commonly thought of as boy racing.
What I believe went on Friday night was, if the second vehicle was involved, I believe that it was a couple of mates being a bit stupid on the road, seeing who could beat each other to a certain point. I don't actually think it was to do with boy races at all.
Mia Tarawhiti says boy racing is not really an accurate term, as those who take part do not race, but travel together in convoys.
Racing, not so much, They call us boy racers. It's a bit of an insult, really, because at max we could get up to maybe 15, maybe 20 k's over the limit. To me, that's not street racing. That is just a whole bunch of people going somewhere.
He says boy racing is more about talking and cruising with your mates, rather than driving at excessive speeds.
We wouldn't normally go out and race down, State Highway 3 because, it's a nice long stretch of road. It's too dangerous. We actually like coming home at the end of the night. It's not something that we would do.
Inspector Freda Grace concedes illegal street racing does occur in Waikato.
On occasions, I'm sure that it occurs. But most of those people are actually very law-abiding. They just go to watch activity. They enjoy looking over other people's cars, engines, types of vehicles, that sort of thing. But I'm sure there is some of that activity, and we're working with them in order to just mitigate the risk.
Mia Tarawhiti says Waikato car enthusiasts send their condolences to the crash victims. He says those who knew some of them plan to hold a memorial meet and cruise past the crash site. In Hamilton, this is Joe O'Brien.
It's just over a minute before 6. Lots of feedback coming in on Moko, whose terrible story we began Checkpoint with tonight. Let's not forget the perpetrators of this heinous crime were abused themselves when young. Where was their victim support? Break the cycle, not throw away the key, says Joan. Wrong question, Moko. Not murder versus manslaughter, but where were the family to support Moko's whānau, to provide alternative care for him when the one friend his mother did to was clearly stretched beyond her capacity? Part of the sentence, says one texter, should be sterilisation for both of them. And finally, John, I totally understand the Crown decision to charge the child killers with manslaughter. Almost weekly, the police have to suffer the ridiculous, wimpish decisions of lame juries not to convict people of murder. Perhaps society should look at itself and ask why we continue to do this rather than trying to blame the police and the Crown. Thank you so much for this feedback. Obviously a very, very distressing story. And we are going to discuss with Chris Finlayson, who is the Attorney General, why the Solicitor General, the Crown Prosecutor and the Solicitor General, Crown Law, decided the best thing to do in this case was accept those manslaughter verdicts rather than pushing for murder, going to trial and putting a murder case before a jury. We will discuss that after 6. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National, on the radio as always, but we're screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. However you are doing so, thank you so much for joining us. Attorney General Chris Finlayson on whether justice has been served for Moko, coming up after the news. Britain plunges deeper into political crisis after the Brexit vote. Cameron's gone and Jeremy Corbyn under intense pressure. And the park at the centre of the Taranaki land wars is to turn into a heritage park. All of that and more coming up in the next 29 and a half minutes. But first, here is the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The whānau of Moko Rangi Toherere have expressed their thanks to the hundreds of people who rallied in support of the 3-year-old and to protest against the abuse and murder of children. Tanya Shaler and David Hairewa were today sentenced in the High Court in Rotorua to 17 years in prison for the manslaughter of the boy in August last year. His uncle, Anthony Paki, spoke outside court after the sentencing.
We just want to thank everybody from the beginning, which this started 10 months ago. It's been quite an affair for the whole family. It's very, very sad. We just want to thank everybody each and every one of you that were here today, that have been doing the marches for us, for my nephew, for our family, Moko.
Anthony Paki. The Labour Party says justice has not been done in the Moko case and his killers should have been charged with murder. Its Shadow Attorney General David Parker says the prosecution should have sought a murder charge and it should have gone to a jury trial.
The prosecution made a wrong decision to accept a plea of manslaughter. It was a jury question as to whether these people knew that the injuries they were inflicting were likely to cause death.
The Labour MP David Parker. The Prime Minister says the government is likely to implement most of the recommendations in a review of the country's foreign trusts regime. The inquiry has found the current rules are not robust enough to protect New Zealand's international reputation. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
John Shewan recommends a significant increase in information to be disclosed when a foreign trust is set up, as well as annual reporting and greater enforcement. He says under the existing regime, there's both the potential and the environment for illicit funds to be hidden in New Zealand trusts. He also recommends changes to anti-money laundering legislation, including extending the existing law to cover lawyers and accountants immediately. The Prime Minister says the government probably won't move that fast on that point, but sees no obstacle to implementing the rest of the recommendations. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
A trade academic is warning against rushing into trade talks with Britain following its vote to leave the European Union. Some commentators argue New Zealand should make negotiations a priority. But Crawford Falconer, who's the Professor of Trade at Lincoln University, says that won't be easy, given New Zealand hopes to kickstart trade talks with Europe next year.
We have to do that in a way which avoids the impression in Brussels that, actually we're going to go running after the Brits rather than after Europe. Very delicate balancing act needs to take place. Didn't need to worry about balancing before.
Crawford Falconer says while New Zealand's trade arrangements won't change in the short term, there is uncertainty over the future of key exports such as meat, about half of which currently goes to Britain. Auckland's Transport Agency says a future transport link to the city's airport is likely to be a light rail system. The council agency today rejected extending the city's commuter rail system as too expensive. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Niall reports.
Auckland Transport says a new link to the airport is at least a decade away, but it says it's rejected commuter rail, which would cost double the estimated $1.3 billion for a tram link and which could serve a wider area. The chair, Lester Levy, says possible high-tech bus options are also being studied but look unlikely. The priority to be given to the link will be decided in talks currently underway with the government over which transport projects are most urgently needed over the next decades. In Auckland, Todd Niall.
Port Taranaki has announced 15 job losses just months after announcing a mid-year profit of $4.5 million. Its chief executive, Guy Roper, says factors in the job cuts are fewer visits by ships, reduced offshore oil and gas exploration, and the end of container trade at the port. He says the port needed to make changes to build a stronger business in a challenging and competitive sector. The port's sole shareholder, the Taranaki Regional Council, was paid a $2.2 million dividend in March, 10% up on the same period a year earlier. Lack of care and attention led an experienced dentist to remove the wrong tooth from a teenage patient. The Health and Disability Commissioner says it was basic dentistry and the unnamed dentist got it wrong. Anthony Hill says the 15-year-old last year required the removal of 3 baby teeth. The dentist removed 2 correctly but wrongly identified the third. He realised his mistake immediately and reinserted the tooth, but the girl had pain and needed a root canal later. Mr Hill says the dentist apologised and tried to minimise the damage. To sport, and Lydia Ko is riding on a wave of confidence following her latest win on the LPGA Tour. New Zealand's world number 1 took the 54-hole tournament in Arkansas by 3 shots to secure her 18th professional title. She now hopes to carry her good form through to the 3rd major of the year, the US Open at Cordoval, in 2 weeks' time.
I'm happy with the way it has ended up, and it's definitely going to give me confidence going into Cordoval.
Lydia Ko. The Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic meet Australian heavyweights, the Queensland Firebirds, in Hamilton tonight in the final game of the penultimate round of the Trans-Tasman Netball League. A handsome win for the defending champions could propel them to the top of the Australian Conference ladder. The Magic have already secured home New Zealand Conference elimination final as they can't be overtaken in second place. The Argentina midfielder Lionel Messi says he's retiring from international football following his side's loss to Chile in the Copa America final. And the All Blacks and Crusaders prop Joe Moody has signed on with New Zealand Rugby for another 3 years through to the 2019 Rugby World Cup. Meanwhile, former All Black wing Zach Guildford is returning to New Zealand following his short stint with the New South Wales Waratahs in Super Rugby. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a guide to avoiding scammers with Consumer Protection Manager Mark Hollingsworth, because you don't want to be one of those born every minute. We have a window on the world of Honduran environmental activists, like the animals they protect and endangered species. And Eric Brenstrom has the world's weather. We've just had the warmest May on record, the 13th such month in a row. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow from Northland to Whanganui, also Coromandel Peninsula Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Showers clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon, patchy rain developing in Northland tomorrow night. Northwesterlies gale in exposed places should ease this afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay remaining rain, clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. From Manawatu to Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy periods, a few showers clearing in Wellington tomorrow afternoon. Nelson and Marlborough mainly fine. Scattered showers tomorrow morning and afternoon, mainly about the ranges. Canterbury and North Otago, cloudy periods, a few showers about the Banks Peninsula, clearing tonight. For the remainder of Otago and Southland, areas of cloud, a few showers about the coast, clearing tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, a few showers north of Hokitika. Spreading to the fjords tomorrow morning, mainly fine elsewhere, and showers for the Chatham Islands. It's 6:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. The couple who pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of the 3-year-old Moko Rangi Tohiriri have been each sentenced to 17 years imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 9 years. David Hairewa, aged 43, and Tanya Shayla, aged 26, were initially charged with murder, and the acceptance of manslaughter pleas was controversial. But the Crown Prosecutor felt achieving guilty verdicts on murder charges against both the accused wasn't guaranteed, and that manslaughter provided certainty and convictions against both of the accused. Attorney General Christopher Finlayson took the highly unusual step of issuing a statement this afternoon supporting the decision. In part, it said the Crown's decision to accept the manslaughter pleas was motivated by the need to secure convictions for this horrendous killing and to avoid the significant risk that either of the defendants could escape such a conviction because of evidential issues. Just after 4 o'clock this afternoon, I asked Mr Finlayson to elaborate.
I don't want to sound overly formal, but they were prepared to plead guilty to manslaughter and submissions could be made on the nature of the crime at sentencing, as opposed to going to a contested trial for murder with all the risks as to admissible evidence that came with that.
And also 2 suspects. So there seems on the face of it to be more confidence around obtaining a conviction for Tanya Shayla than there does for Mr Hairewa. Is that the case?
I don't want to get into that level of detail. Decisions were made about the way in which this case should proceed in relation to both defendants. In general terms, I think I can say, John, that your contentions are probably correct.
One of the suggestions that has been made is that the Crown's trying to save money here. Is there any truth whatsoever in the notion that the cost was a determinant?
No, cost was never a determinant in a matter such as this, nor could it be. It would be repugnant to justice, offensive to the dead child if corners were cut on the basis of cost. There has been some debate in recent days about funding of Crown solicitors. It's a matter where there's legitimate political debate, I suppose, and the Labour Party have raised certain matters. The fact of the matter is, John, that those issues were dealt with in the most recent budget when there was an increase in Crown solicitors' funding of around $5 million per year. But I emphasise and emphasise again that those sorts of issues were irrelevant in the context of this case. As I say, to contend otherwise or for the Crown to cut corners on the basis of cost would be repugnant to justice, and there would be justifiable public outrage about such a position.
If manslaughter was a good verdict to accept because both of the accused were going to plead guilty to it, what were the shortcomings of the murder case? In other words, why was there a sense of equivocation about the ability to gain murder convictions?
Well, it all comes at the end of the day to what the Crown is required to prove beyond reasonable doubt to satisfy the finder of fact, the jury, that a defendant is guilty of murder, and if you like, in relation to Hairewa, there were issues about whether there was evidence which could prove a murderous intent. So there were those sorts of issues that were at the forefront of the minds of both the Crown Solicitor in Rotorua and the Solicitor General when they were dealing with this issue.
So you are persuaded as Attorney General that as well as was possible and achievable beyond reasonable doubt, justice has been done?
Yes, and you must also note that, and this would be, it would totally undermine the rule of law in this country if the political law officer, namely me as Attorney General, got involved in prosecutions. But I have to make sure that the Crown Law Office is doing its job, which is why I've taken the highly unusual step of issuing a press statement and being prepared to answer questions on it.
There's been public protests, there's been a lot of anguish and hurt because this was a terrible crime against a completely innocent child that was prolonged and protracted and ultimately fatal. Did you need, do you think, to respond to that public concern?
I think that it would have been inadvisable and may have appeared heartless simply to use lawyer speak. And I recognise the justifiable anguish and concern. We live in a country full of very, very caring people, and this crime was crying out to heaven for justice. And so I can understand that. And that's why I say this is an extremely unusual situation for me as the political law officer to talk about what went on and why it went on without transgressing the very important constraints that are on me.
It's the Attorney-General Christopher Finlayson. Outside court, Tanya Shayla's lawyer, Ron Mansfield, spoke to our reporter, Edward Gay. He told him that extreme poverty and mental illness both contributed to the tragic events leading up to Moko's death.
You talked about context in your submissions. How do you put a child killing in context?
Well, I think as a community we need to look at what was behind the offending. It was tragic, and there's a lot of people out there shouting about it, and rightly so. But behind that is extreme poverty within this family and also psychiatric illness. And unless we recognise that, we're not going to learn from this event.
And do you think social agencies let this family down?
I don't think there was a clear cry for help to them, but there was certainly enough messages out there for them to prick up their ears and to go and investigate. But look, they're under-resourced as well, and that's a reality. As a country, we need to stand back and we need to look at how we're dealing with poverty. There's extreme poverty out there, and where there's poverty, there's stress. And all of the reports on child abuse show us that where there's stress, there's going to be higher rates of child abuse. So if we really worry about this, let's look at what we do about poverty, let's look at what we do about housing, and let's look at what we do about mental health, because all of those three areas are not being looked at carefully enough.
And this isn't the last act in this case. This is going to go to a coronial inquest. Do you hope that something is going to come out of that?
Well, the coroner can make findings, and hopefully findings along the line that I've just discussed will be identified, and someone will pick up on it. But why do we have to wait? We know now there's poverty. We know now there's not enough resources in mental health. Our courts are full of people with mental health issues. Our prisons are full of them. Longer terms of imprisonment won't help. We need to identify what's behind it and get these people help. And until we do that, we're going to have more victims, not only child victims, but adult victims.
Tanya Shayla's lawyer, Ron Mansfield, speaking with our reporter, Edward Gay. Hundreds of people gathered outside courts around the country demanding, in their words, justice for Moko. About 500 protested outside the Rotorua District Court, where our reporter, Andrew McRae, spoke to some of them.
Justice for Moko has brought us out here. Such a sad story, you know. Your emotions go everywhere, and really there needs to be support. So that's why we're here. Yep, A-Reach. Justice for Moko.
You can hear it in the background, justice for Moko. I think it's really important for not only my children who I brought out of school, especially this morning, but for everybody in New Zealand to understand that it happens in our homes.
Children are New Zealand's future. It is time to stand up and say, murder is murder! Murder!
Obviously a shocking day, but our message has been whatever we're going through, is not as bad as what our children have had to go through in this country, and Moko himself. So really, I think the message has got out there. It seems to be loud and clear from what we're hearing. The government has agreed now to have a review of the plea bargaining issue. So that's part of what we were pushing here. You know, as a dad, as a granddad, I refuse to accept the level of child abuse we have in this country, and we've got to change it.
I look around, look at everybody. I mean, there's just so many people here making a stand. That's what we're all here for. We're here making a statement, and that's the change that's going to happen.
As a survivor of child abuse myself, I feel New Zealand justice system is wrong. It's completely wrong, and it needs to come out of the dark ages.
What changes would you like to see?
Murder is murder. If you kill someone, you do the crime, you do the time. And it shouldn't be Lower down to manslaughter.
I just don't think there's really anything worse in the world, you know. It's a little fella, he's at home, he's beaten by those that are supposed to care for him. Yeah, I think it's just such an important issue.
It's really sad. Another Māori child has, died in the hands of their caregivers. Yeah, so just really to support the cause and show them that there is another way.
Those scenes outside the Rotorua District Court today. Our reporter Andrew McRae was there. Britain's Chancellor George Osborne, who has really disappeared without trace, I suspect there's been more sightings of Elvis in the past 72 hours, is finally speaking to comfort, calm, appease or address the markets in the UK. He has begun, very matter-of-factly, Britain is ready to confront whatever the future holds for us, Osborne says. He's gone on to say he didn't want that referendum result, but it's democracy, they're going to have to work with it, and Britain can indeed cope. George Osborne speaking to the markets. He's just begun. Of course, the British vote to leave the European Union last week has not only toppled a Prime Minister, it's plunged the British Labour Party into chaos and sparked rebellion, potential rebellion in Scotland. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has threatened to use the Scottish Parliament to block the UK's exit from the EQ. The comments come a day after she said she was laying the groundwork for a second independence referendum. The ABC's Europe correspondent Steve Carnane reports.
In last week's referendum, 62% of Scots voted to stay in the European Union. And on the streets of Edinburgh, there's plenty of anger and disappointment that they'll now be forced to leave the EU.
We were both a little bit disappointed.
Very disappointed.
Yeah. We both wanted to remain in the EU, so it came as quite a shock.
I think it's very unfair that, as a nation, we've decided on one thing, and yet, despite our best efforts, we're getting dragged away from a place we want to be.
I was pretty disappointed, if I'm honest. Happy with my own country, but a little disappointed with the UK as a whole.
And that sense of disappointment goes right to the top. After a cabinet meeting on Saturday, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said she was preparing the groundwork for a second independence referendum. Now she's taking it a step further, threatening to use the Scottish Parliament to block the UK's exit from the European Union.
If the Scottish Parliament was judging this on the basis of what's right for Scotland, then the option of saying, look, we're not going to vote for something that is against Scotland's interests, of course that's got to be on the table.
When asked whether she could imagine the fury of the British people at such an undemocratic move, Nicola Sturgeon defended the proposal.
You know, it's perhaps similar to the fury of many people in Scotland right now as we face the prospect of being taken out of the European Union against our will. I didn't create these situations. I've got to try to navigate the best way forward through them. I'm not pretending any of them are easy.
The leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson, played a key role in the Remain campaign. But she does not believe the Scottish Parliament has the authority to block the UK from exiting the EU.
The advice that I've taken suggests that this actually is not within the power of Holyrood. There will be a statement from the First Minister on Tuesday within the Parliament, and I look forward to her clarifying what, if any, legal advice she has taken to that effect.
As Scotland considered blocking Brexit, the Labour Party started tearing itself apart over Jeremy Corbyn's lacklustre campaign to keep the UK in the EU. Hilary Benn was sacked from Shadow Cabinet after he called Mr Corbyn and told him he had lost confidence in his ability to lead the party. Before the day had finished, 11 Shadow Cabinet members had resigned. Among them, Seema Malhotra and Heidi Alexander.
We need a leader who can help us be a more effective opposition, as well as look like a government in waiting. For all his qualities, I don't believe that leader is Jeremy.
Could I say that I felt that Jeremy was the best person to be leading the Labour Party in developing the answers that the country is now demanding, and I didn't feel I could do that.
Jeremy Corbyn has said he will stand in any new leadership election and reshape his shadow cabinet over the next 24 hours. British politics is in a state of turmoil. Labour has a leader the parliamentary party doesn't want. The Conservatives have a Prime Minister they can't convince to stay on. There are tough times ahead for whoever leads their respective parties in the months ahead.
Ain't that the truth? That was the ABC's Europe correspondent. 6:23. Officials in flood-stricken areas of West Virginia and the US have begun the clean-up after an historic deluge killed at least 25 people, flooding homes, destroying roads, you name it. Survivors have spoken of their devastation and heartbreak. Ashley Scott recalled smelling gas and rising floodwaters before her home simply exploded.
We heard an explosion and we smelled stuff burning. And the next thing I knew, I heard my mother-in-law scream that she was stuck in a tree and she was burned badly. I grabbed onto the chain link fence with my 4-year-old daughter and we broke into a house to try to save our lives. I can't get the memories out of my head, especially with people who have lost loved ones.
There was a elderly lady in one of the houses that was holding her husband up. She, 118 pounds, soaking wet, and she was holding her husband up out of the water. And he was deceased. Most of the elderly that has lived here all their lives, it didn't even dawn on them to even leave.
I don't want to go through this again. Most of my furniture was my grandparents' furniture, and lost everything.
West Virginia, incredible scenes there. Plans are evolving to turn the Pa, where the first shots were fired in the Taranaki land wars, into a heritage park. The New Plymouth District Council has announced that it's bought a 4-hectare site where Te Kohia Pa once stood in the 1860s. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
The only acknowledgement of Te Kohia Pa's significance today is a tattered sign on a scruffy piece of reserve land on the outskirts of Waitara. Nearby, Ngāti Awa Chief Wiremu Kingi Tirangitaki took a stand against the surveying of the disputed Peka block. He and about 80 followers threw up Te Kohia Pa overnight on March the 16th, 1860, in defiance of Colonel Charles Gold and the 500 men he'd amassed to put Kingi in his place. The following day, Gold's troops fired more than 200 rounds from 2 24-pound howitzers at the Pa, sparking the First Taranaki War. Kingi's men were able to escape unscathed under the cover of darkness because Te Kohia had been built with a series of bomb shelters. The chairman of the Te Atiawa Hapu o Tārawa, Rawiri Dorbar, says it's only right the Pa's significance is finally being recognised.
As opposed from being a forgotten war and a war that was hidden away, the retrieval of sites like this provides an opportunity for us to have a discussion about what happened and what is the context of the relationship between the community and the local Māori. Those sorts of conversations, it's really cool.
The council says it wants to work with Te Kotahitanga o Te Atiawa to develop Te Kohia into a permanent memorial with cultural, tourism and educational dimensions. Mr. Dorbar says it could play an important role in Māori-Pākehā relations.
Look, it's important because it is a tangible site, it is a tangible place, it's somewhere where we can visit and pay our respects to our history. And in New Zealand, this country, and previous councils, they haven't really been forward in acknowledging those things of the past.
New Plymouth Mayor Andrew Judd hopes the Pa site can now become a place of reconciliation.
For me, it's a place of coming together to learn about our combined history, the actions that were taken in that very spot that started the land wars here in Taranaki. That'll give us an opportunity to learn and to heal.
Mr. Judd says the development of a heritage centre will have multiple benefits for the region.
To have a centre or a hub, see how those Pa sites that were revolutionary were built, learn about our culture, learn about what those actions were that led into all of what happened in Waitara and Taranaki and indeed New Zealand. Tourists, of course, we can show our story. So it's an exciting opportunity for us all.
On the streets of New Plymouth, the idea has almost universal approval.
Anything that's going to develop the cultural diversity of New Plymouth is well worth it.
We pride ourselves on being a multicultural country, so we should spend money on educating people on things like that.
I didn't actually know about the history behind it, but yeah, it sounds fairly significant, seeing as the land wars did shake this area and rumble on for quite a while, so yeah, sounds all right.
I think it's pretty right, given that the council
doesn't feel it's appropriate to have the Māori seats and representation in council. So I see that as a fairly superficial attempt to look like they value Māori history.
A lot of the places that have historical significance between Pākehā and Māori are kind of just, they're there, but they're not very well known to the general public. So yeah, it's a good start anyway.
Oh, I think it'll be quite good for the city, and it doesn't hurt to know the history about the place. And if it brings in some income as well, then that's fine.
I mean, it's historic. It's why not? We need these sort of places. It's we've got to remember the past. And it encourages the young kids to keep the culture going as well.
I think it's a pretty good idea too. It's probably not the sort of history you want to lose. I think more people should know about it.
The council paid $715,000 for the site, which it says will be paid for through selling surplus land and the home now on the Pā site, leasing some of the land for grazing and debt. It takes possession of the property in August. For Checkpoint, Robin Martin.
29 minutes past 6. We're going to end tonight with some feedback, and this is from Martin Judd. Evening. Just imagine, can you imagine, if someone might have had the brains and forethought to expand the new Waterview Tunnel, this is Auckland from the airport, to a size that could accommodate a train track alongside the road. Then they would only have needed a connection between airport and tunnel and Point Chev. Is there a station there, or Mount Albert? And there could have been a rail link from airport to downtown by the time the new city rail link is completed. Imagine. But hey, this is New Zealand, we don't plan ahead, and so nothing ever happens in time for needs. Martin, imagining, makes good sense to me, Martin, but it ain't going to happen, is it? Thank you everyone for being with Checkpoint. We'll be back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. A very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Labour Party says justice has not been done in the Moko case and his killers should have been charged with murder, not manslaughter. The Prime Minister says the government is likely to implement most of the recommendations in a review of the country's foreign trusts regime. Auckland's Transport Agency says a future transit link to the city's airport is likely to be a light rail system. Port Taranaki has announced 15 job losses just months after announcing a mid-year profit of $4.5 million. Australian political parties are nervous of a similar protest vote to that of Brexit when the polls close in the federal election this weekend. And the New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko says today's win on the LPGA Tour puts her in good stead for the upcoming major, the US Open, in 2 weeks' time. Our next news and weather is at 7. This is RNZ.